We told you yesterday about a deal brokered between Oregon Governor Kate Brown and the White House to withdraw federal agents sent to Portland to deal with protests. Today, President Trump is publicly insulting the governor and appears to be backing off from that potential deal. Protesters once again took to the streets of Portland for a 62nd straight night Wednesday to demonstrate against police brutality and systemic racism. In her latest piece for ProPublica, Dara reports that about a dozen Portland protesters facing federal charges had to agree to not going to so-called public gatherings as a condition of release from jail. And Dara joins me now. Dara, thanks very much for being with us. Tell us more about your reporting. Is what protesters who have been arrested are being asked to do, to sign rather, is that legal?
The question of what's legal is often a question of what various actors in the criminal justice system will allow to happen. And in this case, it did turn out to be the case that magistrate judges were signing their names to orders that restricted this, that both prosecutors and defense attorneys were allowing it to go forward. Of course, that can change when things come to public attention. And so we've actually gotten word shortly after we published the piece, and it's become clear over the last couple of days that with the new attention to these arrangements, that the magistrate courts have backed down some and aren't appending this as a condition, potentially because they've realized that this would be, at very least, an overbroad condition to put on people. It's common to put geographic restrictions, like you can't return to the scene of the alleged crime, on somebody's release when you allow them to stay out of jail before their trial. But the constitutional experts that we spoke to for this piece were pretty clear that it was going far beyond that to say that no matter where in the city or even in the state somebody was going to a protest, that would somehow not be an acceptable thing for them to do because of their conditions of release.
And Dara, what have you observed in recent days and weeks about how protests in Portland may have changed? Have a lot of people been charged, for instance, with federal crimes?
There has been a rapid escalation in the number of people who are charged with federal crimes over the last couple of weeks, but it would not be accurate to say that that's a change in the nature of the protests. A lot of the charges that have been filed in the last couple of weeks as part of this escalation have been for minor offenses like failure to obey a lawful order, which is something that's actually only a federal crime when it happens on federal property, which includes the sidewalk outside the federal courthouse that's become the epicenter of protests. So it's not entirely clear whether the federal government is using these charges to target protesters who they feel are more significant dangers but aren't charging them with more significant crimes, or whether this is just the federal government's effort to charge protesters by whatever means they can, rather than actually looking at the most serious things that they're concerned about. Even though the government says they're only in Portland to protect against property damage and violence, the fact is that in many of these cases, about 40% of those who have been charged aren't charged with anything that's directly related to what they say they're there to protect.
Well, Vice President Mike Pence said today that federal agents are not leaving Portland until the federal courthouse there is secure. President Trump echoed that sentiment. Where do things currently stand in Portland, and has the Trump administration offered a timeline for when they hope to see this happen?
No, not at all. And this is actually something that it became clear immediately on Wednesday that there was something of a disconnect between the way that Oregon Governor Kate Brown talked about the deal that she'd struck and the way the federal government did. The federal government was saying immediately that they had agreed to let Oregon State Police secure the courthouse, but that they wouldn't leave until they were assured not only that things had remained calm, but that violence wouldn't spike after they left, which is a very elastic condition because you can easily imagine a world in which even after several nights in which nothing serious happens, the government says, well, this is only because we've stayed on standby and we could deploy if we needed to. So it really is going to be up to for one, Oregon State Police and what kind of tactics they employ around the courthouse. Two, it'll depend on what the next few nights of protests look like and how confrontational they get. And it'll also, I think, depend some on whether the federal government is more interested in kind of accepting a victory and saying, well, our involvement secured the courthouse, or whether they're more interested in sticking around and continuing to portray this as a serious, imminent risk of property damage that justifies federal involvement.
Really underscores the importance of having journalists on the scene to observe what is taking place there. Dara Lynn, thank you so much for sharing your reporting with us.
Thank you.